Beautiful. Thank you so much. Perfect song to come into the message for today. Today we're talking about the Church of Amor, the church that I'm going to focus on with the Cathars in the late 12th and early 13th century of France, who were the mystics, who carried the Church of Amor. And the traditional Roman church is the Church of Roma, but as I've shared with you before, the mirror image of that is the Church of Amor. One is the seen structural church, the other is the spiritual mystical church that abided side by side with it. And from first century Christianity, this mystical path was very much part of the Christian tradition. The codification didn't come until later through various church councils and trying to create a framework that would keep this living spiritual tradition alive in the world. And this mystical path is ever present. Even the Roman Catholic Church has mystics that remind everyone of this intimate relationship of love that each one of us has with the divine, if we're willing to engage in it and seek it. And so the Cathars were ones that were practicing a path of love, and it was a path of divine union at all kinds of levels. They wore blue robes by tradition. I mentioned that. I've led several pilgrimages and spoken over in Europe on the Cathars a number of times, and I'm amazed there's always at least one person who comes up and says, for years when I've meditated or prayed, I've seen blue robes and I had no idea what they represented. And so they did that. The perfecti were the teachers, and they were both men and women, equally present, equally honored. This tradition emerged in a great Renaissance, where in the south of France and, for example, in Toulouse and another number of other places, the more mystical end of the Christian, the Jewish, and the Muslim tradition all met and blended and shared and communed with one another, seeing that divine spark in all of their traditions rather than saying no. And so it was this rich, rich time of a renaissance of creativity, of balance and wholeness, of harmonizing with the divine and with one another. It's the time where the chivalric tradition emerged and the troubadour tradition emerged. And what's interesting is the chivalric tradition, the meaning of the word is to seek, but the troubadour tradition, trouver, is to find. And so it's seeking and finding. And one is more the masculine energy and the other is the feminine energy, both honored. It's not either or, it's and. Just like men and women served in leadership roles with this particular group. They particularly honored and celebrated Mary Magdalene as the first apostle, which about 2.5 years ago, the current Pope agreed that she was the apostle to the apostles. In all 4 Gospels, Mary Magdalene is the one that meets the risen Jesus first. She then goes and tells everyone else. And so rather than a church based on Peter, the Church of Rome, the Church of Amor is based more around a balancing of the masculine and the feminine with a real honoring of Magdalene and of Mother Mary, but particularly Magdalene as companion and co-creator of this path of lived love. They focused more on the life of Jesus and saw him embodied in the image of the Grail rather than his death on the cross. They believed that the most important message was that of love and of light. And so the Gospel of John was the only gospel they carried. and that they read and studied and were inspired by. It is by far the most mystical of the Gospels and is very different than the other three. And so they sought to walk this path of love. Their name actually means perfecti is perfected ones. They were the gentle, loving ones, the Cathars in their path. And it's interesting because traditionally, most scholarship has said that the Gnostic tradition was always very aesthetic, where you did not enjoy bodily comforts. You did not honor the world because that was created of matter, which was not of the divine. And I've always struggled with that, particularly with this particular expression of Gnosticism, which is that sense of inner knowing. I'm not talking about it as a bulk movement, but the meaning of the word Gnostic, inner knowing, to know, to have a direct connection with God. And they emerged during this time of Renaissance and of honoring of both masculine and feminine, of heaven and divine embodiment. They were focused very much on realizing the power of healing, both spiritual healing and finding healing in the plants that were all around them, the elementals that were all around them. They saw the connection between life on earth and life in sky, as they honored the circling and changing of the planets and the stars, all as part of the divine whole. And I loved it. I read Cynthia Bourgeau's book, The Meaning of Mary Magdalene, and I went, okay, that's what I've been feeling all of these years. She said that traditionally they're seen as radical aesthetics, despising everything the world has to offer, but it simply does not fit with the gentle and sophisticated culture that came into being around them. What scholars have consistently failed to spot is that Catharism and courtly love are interlocking pieces. Fit them together and you are staring at a school of fifth-way love. The real treasure of the Cathars is an integral and unique expression of Christianity as a path of love, as the Church of Amor. And so they sought to always respond to things as to the best of their ability, with kindness, with grace, with gentleness. And this path was so present then, and then it disappeared. And she writes that the river's still flowing, but it went underground because the surface was far too inhospitable. But we're blessed in that in our lifetimes, that stream that's been flowing underground is now springing forth with sweet waters and oases all over the world for us to find right on the path of our own lives. The power of the Church of Love. They became so powerful that the traditional Roman Church did not respect, or did not honor them. They were threatened by them because the Cathars believed everyone had a direct contact with the divine, so you didn't have to go through a priest or a church. The Catharais, with their perfecti, were walking together as brothers and sisters in Christ, in light. And on March 16th, 1244, was the final siege at the end of the Inquisition. The first big Inquisition that the Roman Catholic Church did was against the Cathars, and they sought to destroy them. Although even now in the south of France, there are families who continue to carry the living tradition to this day of the Church of Amor. And I've led a number of pilgrimages down to the south of France to go to these places and to the Magdalene site. And there is a huge response of in this. And this tradition I love because for me, it holds the essential message of Christianity, which is that it is a practice of love. Jesus' teachings were all about the power of love to transform us. Love is the greatest commandment of all. If you can do that one, you've got everything else covered. You're supposed to love God with all of your body, your mind, your heart, and your soul. You're supposed to love yourself, God, and others. You're supposed to love your neighbors as yourself. You're supposed to love your enemies. So however hard or easy it is, love is the power that enables life to have meaning and purpose and harmony. We have been sent to become aware, as Jesus was, that the kingdom of heaven is here and now, in, through, and as us. And the pathway to that is that path of love, the fifth way path of love that is expressed in the Church of Love through all of us, through the living example of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, who, whether you believed they were married or not, had children or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is a recognition that man and woman walk side by side in this world through all of its challenges, seeking to hold this presence of love. It is said in a prophecy that 700 years from the end at Montsegur of the Cathar movement in an outer expression, there would be a resurgence of this Church of Amor. And so you take it, and 700 years later, you're at 1944, World War II, and it is during this period that Carl Jung says, in darkest times, new and ancient light re-emerges to guide our way and to inspire us with the truths that never change. The Nag Hammadi was discovered with all of these other gospels, one of which is the Gospel of Mary, which is Mary Magdalene. That is the story of how she is asked by the disciples to please tell the stories, tell us the deeper teachings, because the Master Jesus shared with you things that we might not be quite ready for. Will you share some with us? And so she does. And then Peter and Andrew go, wait a minute, no, this can't be right. How could Jesus have given this to a woman? Forgetting that she was the apostle to the apostles, and walk side by side with him through the entire experience, including the crucifixion, the laying in the garden, and the resurrection. She walked through the entire experience. And it's the ancient teacher who looks at all of them and says, stop. He loved her, and they shared a wisdom on the way of love, the path of love. He would have shared with her things that he might not have shared with others, and you need to honor her for her message. I am so thrilled that we're living in a time that this is reemerged, because it is something we all so deeply and profoundly need right now. They lived through difficult times. They held a center of love and peace, even when attacked to the point that they were martyred and sent into the fire. Challenging times. The main records we have about them are the Inquisitional records. Luckily, in the south of France, they've maintained other records and oral histories around what they stood for. And so we too are living in turbulent and challenging times. This teaching has been reemerging for us to have an inspiration and a way to look at one another, how we create community, how we express love in not only our personal relationships, but with our global relationships. The first time I was blessed to go up to Montsegur, I made it all the way up to the top, and in a way I was kind of dreading going up there because I thought, oh, it's such a place of heartbreak. And I have a deep sense I was there. I've had remembrances of it since I was a child. And it wasn't until I studied that I learned what it was that I was remembering. And whether it's a connection with a soul who experienced that or whether I actually did, I approached it in prayer and in reverence and with a real open soul. But I was expecting to feel deep grief. And as I stood at the monument down at the bottom of the citadel, that is where they were martyred, I felt only deep, profound peace. And I took the circuitous path all the way up, straight up to the citadel at the top of the mountain. And as I centered in there, I knew right where the high altar was, and I went there and prayed. And I looked around and I realized it felt open and light, and not one soul was trapped there. All had lifted out on love and light, and that they scattered and that they are now embodied in the world once again. So you may, whether you've dreamt of blue robes or not, you may be part of this spark of light of the Church of Love that is reemerged in our times for us to find. I love one of the things that Cynthia Bourgeault says. She says, if I am right, then the true progeny, the true children of Mary Magdalene and Jesus is the path of fifth way love itself. Their intertwined hearts bear fruit in a distinctive flavor of love that is visionary, transformative, inclusive, and ubiquitously creative. And so I'd like to share with you the Cathar prophecy. And I've divided it into 5 pieces, and I'll do a piece and then do a brief title in the next piece, because it's quite long but quite wonderful, but it will go fast enough for you to all experience this whole prophecy. I started to do a piece and I went, no, this is a calling for all of us, for who we can be in these turbulent times. The Cathar prophecy, the universal truth of love. It has no fabric, only understanding. It has no membership, save only those who know they belong. It has no rivals because it's uncompetitive. It has no ambition, for it seeks only to serve. It knows no boundaries, for nationalisms are unloving. It is not of itself, because it seeks to enrich all groups and religions. It acknowledges all great teachers of all the ages who have shown the truth of love. Practicing love. Those who participate practice the truth of love in all their being. There is no walk of life or nationality that is a barrier. Those who are, know. It seeks not to teach, but to be, and by being, to enrich. It recognizes that the way we are may be the way of those around us because we are that way. It recognizes the whole planet as a being of which we are a part. Our alchemical time. It recognizes that the time has come for the supreme transmutation, the ultimate alchemical act of conscious change of the ego into a voluntary return to the whole. It does not proclaim itself with a loud voice, but in the subtle realms of loving. It salutes all those in the past who have emblazoned the path but have paid the price. It admits no hierarchy or structure, for there is no one greater than the other. Its members all know each other by their deeds, and by their being, and by their eyes, and by no outward sign save the fraternal embrace. Our calling. Each one will dedicate their life to the silent loving of their neighbor and the environment and the planet, whilst carrying out their task, however exalted or humble. It recognizes the supremacy of the great idea may only be accomplished if the human race practices the supremacy of love. It has no reward to offer here or in the hereafter, save that of the ineffable joy of being and loving. Each shall seek to advance the cause of understanding by doing good by stealth and teaching only by example. They shall heal their neighbor, their community, and our planet. They shall know no fear and feel nor shame, and their witness shall prevail over all odds. The Church of Amor. It has no secrets, no arcanum, no initiation, save that of the true understanding of the power of love. And that, if we want it to be so, the world will change, but only if we change ourselves first. Only those who belong, belong. They belong to the Church of Love. You are part of the emerging and expressing Church of Amor in this alchemical time of transformation, holding on to the power of love, the presence of the divine, and the wonder and miracles of grace will help us move through our times, even as this same inspiration moved through the first century church, through Magdalene and Jesus and the disciples in the circle and all the lives they touched directly. And from that place, that early church with all the people that it touched, and on and on and on, through thousands of years of one heart being touched by another, sometimes flowing underground, but ever present for those who will center and go deep and touch it, and then bring it into expression in our world. And even though they were martyred, they were not contained by that place or by the martyrdom. They were freed to continue on their soul journeys that we, even to this day, I believe, are continuing to express. The Church of Love. you shall know them. He said this is a wonderful way to speak, not only of the Cathars, but of all people of faith, whichever path they follow. And by us in our world, by our fruits we shall be known. Let us nurture that consciousness of love, however difficult, however challenged. Let us walk this path that is the true path of the Christian faith, that calls us to be the embodied presence of the divine, to be in the world, but still not of the world, to have this spiritual perspective. However jagged the edges and dark the world may seem, the presence of God is here. The sparks of light are ever present, and we are the channels through which that will be expressed. As I shared last week, like the mystics of the Jewish tradition, the mystics of the Cathars believed that every prayer, every act of kindness releases a spark of light or reunites a shard of God into wholeness. And once they're all reunited, there is a bridge between heaven and earth. Those bridges also abide in our own hearts and beings. So I invite you to recognize that you are part of an ancient and continuing lineage that believes in the power of love, in the beauty of the relationship of Jesus and Magdalene, and in the mystical tradition of the church, which renews, inspires, and offers portals to new understandings of who we are and who we've been sent to be. Let us pray. Sweet, sweet Spirit, abiding presence of the divine. In you we live, we move, we have our being. We abide in the truth of love. We seek to practice the truth of love to the best of our being. We allow love to evolve and transmute us and our world. And we open in willingness to allow the supremacy of love to move through us. We understand the power of love, and so the world will change as we change. And we feel all around us the kindred souls scattered all over the globe who are part of this universal church of love that has risen above ground again to bring the sweet water of spirit, the living power of love, to nourish us, to inspire us as we move through this world in these turbulent times. May we remember to drink from the spring of love as we find time of Sabbath and sanctuary each day. And may we remember we never walk alone, for we have one another, we have the presence of the divine, and we have a rich heritage that we are carrying forward and that we will pass on to our children and grandchildren and those beyond that. May we be conscious holders of the Church of Amor, here and now, just as we are. And for this we are so profoundly grateful. We go forth renewed, restored, and rededicated to an ancient path, shedding light again. May it radiate in, through, and as us. And so it is. Om, Amen, and blessed be.